welcome everyone. My name is Matt. I'm a member of the Victorian Skeptics. My Twitter name is ILikePortello. If anyone wants to follow me on Twitter, it's just an obscure gag that I'll talk about another time.
Oh no, come on.
Questions afterwards. There'll be lots of time. For Skeptic Camp, generally they tell you to talk about what you know, so I don't know a huge amount, but I'm a bit of a maths nerd. I studied maths at uni. I actually did honours in maths here at Melbourne Uni. And it's just something I've been interested in for a long time. My professional job is I work as an actuary, which is more or less a corporate mathematician, or a mathematician whose soul is sold, if you want to put it that way. So I wanted to talk to you about a few mathematical things, particularly to do with skepticism. Maths generally isn't considered a polite topic for polite conversation, but you know, I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to get up and bang on about it for 20 minutes, so that'll be fine. The title's actually a reference to a famous mathematical work by Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead called the Principia Mathematica, or the Principles of Mathematics, so you can read this as being skeptical of mathematics or something. What I'm actually going to talk about mainly though is statistics, and being skeptical of particularly some of the ways that statistics get presented to us. So as I was thinking about what to talk about, I started twittering a few things that occurred to me. So just little things like this. So that was kind of thing. So I thought that was some good potential topics. There was one that I did that I thought had the most potential was this one. And so I'm going to explore that a little bit. It's an open question whether whether any particular publicist is misrepresenting any particular statistic. But I'm pretty sure this happens a lot, and in fact I'm pretty sure it happens probably about 80% of the time. It's not just publicists though. Statistics are very malleable things, and it is pretty easy to make them say just about anything you like. So let's talk about probability. This is the way probability is generally represented in a notational sense. And so often as a very mathematical looking concept, I think it's often this misrepresented can be simply from a misunderstanding of how it works. There's an old joke about a guy who is so terrified of being on a plane with a terrorist carrying a bomb that he decides he'll carry a bomb with him because he figures the probability of having two bombs on the one plane must be minuscule. Obviously that doesn't work, but that kind of thinking actually can be quite deceptive. And so in the notational sense, he's looking at this probability of two bombs on the plane, which is obviously going to be small, as long as, you know, they're independent. But what he actually should be looking at is this. This is what's called a conditional probability. So the bit to the right of the line is the information we already know. We already know there's one bomb on the plane. So what we should be asking is, what's the probability of two bombs, given we know there's one bomb? And when you think about it, that's just the probability of one bomb. It doesn't actually change anything. So, but this kind of thinking, depending on how it's presented, particularly in the media, it can get really confusing. So one particular way I wanted to talk about that this gets misrepresented is called the lottery fallacy. Obviously the lottery is something that's very much based on statistics and probabilities of winning. If you think about a lottery, the odds of any one person winning is tiny. It's really, really small. But someone wins most weeks. Most weeks someone will win the jackpot, so what's going on? There's a thing in maths called the law of large numbers, and it's saying that if you have enough opportunities for something to happen, eventually even really rare things will happen. And so in the case of the lottery, you have millions and millions of people entering it each week. And so someone wins. These unlikely events do happen. The fallacy happens. The mistake is when you turn it around. After it's already happened, you've got your unlikely occurrences simply because of the law of large numbers. You point to the winner and say, they couldn't possibly have won. What are the odds against that? It's impossible. That's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance they couldn't have won. And yet they did. And so, I'll give you another example. For example, so what's your name?
John.
That's highly unlikely. Really, there's only a tiny proportion of the population has that name, so I just don't think that sounds likely at all. So that's the kind of thing that can happen. If you look at it from the end, after we've already found the winner of our lottery, and then trying to make some comment about how likely or unlikely that was. This kind of fallacy pops up a lot in pseudoscience, and particularly justifications for pseudoscience. So if we think about psychics, they'll make use of this quite a lot. A psychic who's looking at predicting the future will throw out a whole bunch of predictions, some of them specific, some of them very general, for what's going to happen in, say, the next year. And then if they throw out enough, lot of large numbers, odds are something will hit. And then at the end of the year, they can point to those hits and say, hey, wow, look at the ones I got right. And then just quietly bury the ones that they got wrong. Alternative medicine, this is everyone's favorite, alternative medicine, homeopathy. But this is true of just about any alternative medicine. We have the extreme cases in alternative medicine where people who are actually really sick use these things and end up dying. But the bread and butter of alternative medicine is not those situations. The bread and butter of this stuff is the people who just use them regularly for very small and often self-correcting kinds of illnesses. And if your homeopaths and your chiropractors, etc., get enough people to come in often enough, there will just be a regular little sequence, as there always is, of things that go wrong, things that get better, and they can just pick and choose those and say, yep, that was cured by the homeopathy dose you took, that was cured by the neck crunch that I gave you that Gino was just talking about, that chiropractors so love to do. Ghost hunters, demons for this kind of thing. They'll walk around dark. I hate ghost hunters. I just find it incredibly dull. These people walking around these darkened rooms wearing night vision goggles and just scaring the crap out of each other. It's tedious. But what they do is they get all of their equipment with low resolution cameras and really crap audio, and then afterwards they go through and listen to it, all these little audio anomalies and compression artifacts in the video, and they point to these things and say, oh look, there's a ghost. And if you get enough of that stuff, you will be able to find little anomalies that you can point to. And this is what they do. So there are a few examples of how this kind of thinking can work in a pseudoscientific basis. I actually want to look at another example which is a little more subtle, which actually came up in quite a high-profile court case. Is anywhere, these guys? The guy in the middle is Mr. Barbara Streisand, James Brolin. The guy on the left is Sam Waterston from Law and Order. And the guy on the right is well-known footballer, actor, and women's rights campaigner, OJ Simpson. So this is actually from the 1978 film Capricorn 1, which is a great film. It's about the American government's attempt to fake a Mars landing. And so, that's conspiracy theory for another time. But it's a terrific movie, anyway. And so, OJ Simpson obviously was accused in the 1990s of murdering his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ronald Goldman. That's OJ going for a bit of a drive, a few of his friends. During OJ's murder trial, one of his lawyers, which is this guy, Alan Dershowitz, Alan's the guy on the left, he was, prior to this, Alan Dershowitz was actually best known for representing porn star Harry Reams in the 1970s, when Reams had been convicted for distributing obscenity in relation to the film Deep Throat. Dershowitz actually represented Reams in his appeal. So he's got excellent legal pedigree, which is fantastic. And so during the trial, Dershowitz came up with a statistic that he was using to defend OJ. And the statistic was that fewer than 1 in 1,000 men who beat their wives go on to murder them. That was the statistic that he used. So it's basically this. He's saying that the probability that a man who beats his wife will go on to murder her is less than 1 in 1,000. So it's a tiny probability. So on the basis of that, he's saying the fact that OJ had beaten Nicole, and this was a known fact. He'd pleaded no contest to this about 5 years before this murder trial. He was saying that because of this, that should not have been admissible evidence because the odds against it, apparently, having anything to do with it, are huge. But this is, in essence, the lottery fallacy because we are leaving out one really, really, really important fact. We know that Nicole was murdered. We're at her murder trial. We know that. And so I wouldn't be so insensitive as to put it that Nicole won this particular lottery. But the fact is, this is the way that Alan was representing this data. So what we can't do is point out how unlikely it was that she would be murdered before she'd been murdered, given that we know she has been murdered. It just doesn't work. And so what we need to do is to work out this probability, is actually take into account all the information that we have. So the real question is this: what's the probability that she was murdered by the person who beat her, given that we know she was beaten and that we know she was murdered? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's the information we know. We know she's beaten. So what's the probability that he was the one, the person who beat her was the one that did it? I'm trying to get as little information as I can. And that is actually a very different number. The probability of that is over 80%. Which makes a huge difference. And so we all know how the trial of OJ Simpson worked out in the end, obviously, and he ended up writing a book with a hypothetical if he did it, even though apparently he didn't, which is very strange. Anyway, these were just a few examples I wanted to make of how this kind of thinking about statistics can lead to some interesting results. And the point I want to make is that it's really important when you're reading some of this statistical information, particularly in the media, to try to get an idea of what's behind it. What information do we already know? What information should we be taking into account when we look at this sort of thing? So, as always, be skeptical. So that's the end of my talk. Did anyone, well, a few minutes left. Does anyone have any questions about anything mathematical?
Yeah, thanks for that. Very, very entertaining. I've looked at examples you're going through. With the recent UR satellite, the plus-sized satellite that came down.
Yeah.
I saw a lot in the press about the chances of someone being killed by this.
Yeah.
It was put, what, 1 in 4,500 or something.
Yeah.
And that isn't quite the truth, of course, because I would present that as the chance of someone being killed. It was actually the chance of anyone on Earth being hit by this thing.
Yeah.
It was 1 in 4,500.
Yeah, which is quite different. And so then the chances of any one particular person being hit or killed is way smaller than that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But it doesn't get presented like that.
Yeah.
In the press. It's like,
yeah.
Oh, that's I know that from people.
Yeah. And it can be really easy to confuse this sort of thing. There's another famous statistical thing, which is that if you have 23 people in a room, there's a 50% chance that 2 of them will share a birthday. There's no particular birthday, just any birthday. A guy went on the Johnny Carson show, I think in the 70s, with this particular thing. And Johnny Carson said, oh, there's like 200 people in the audience. You know, does anyone share my birthday, which was, September 10th or something? And none of them did. But that wasn't what it was. It's not that 2 people will share a specific birthday. It's that 2 people will share a birthday of any day. Yes.
But I'm a high school maths teacher, and I'm actually currently teaching probability.
All right.
Do I have your permission to use that method to teach conditional probability to my kids? So, I think that would be a lot more fun than the way
Is it appropriate to use slides with daggers and fists?
Oh, I plan on bringing a dagger in and punching a student.
No problem, I'll give you a copy of the slides as well. Any other questions? Oh, I was hoping someone would ask me about Monty Hall. We can bang on about that for ages.
Tell us about Monty Hall.
Okay. This was my filler. Has anyone heard of the Monty Hall problem? This is Oh, not that many people.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Okay. It's a game show where, I should have brought props. If you have, I'll be Monty Hall, I'm the host. I have 3 doors, doors 1, 2 and 3. Behind 2 of these doors are goats, and behind 1 of these doors is a brand new car. Now I want you to choose a door and see if you get the car. So door 1, 2 or 3? 2. 2. Okay. I'm now opening up door 1 and I'm showing you a goat. So the question now is, would you like to switch to door number 3, or would you like to stick with your original choice of door number 2?
I'll switch to door number 3.
That's an excellent choice.
The trouble is I don't exactly know why.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about that. So, and the correct answer is, given this situation, the correct answer is you should always switch. You will double your chances of winning the car if you switch doors. Now the reason for this is, again, it's based on a conditional probability. The fact is that Monty Hall, the host, he knows where the car is. And so he will, when he opens a door, he will always show you a goat. So the fact that Monty knows that must play into your thinking about how this probability works. When you chose your original door, there was a 1 in 3 chance that you had the right door, that you had chosen the car. Monty is always going to show you a goat. So it does not change the probability that you have chosen a car. It's still 1 in 3. Therefore, if you switch to the other door, your probability will now be 2 in 3 that you have chosen a car. I appreciate this is counterintuitive, and this has been the result of many, many, many discussions and arguments on the internet. But that's the way it works. There's another way to think about it, which another example which might make it a little bit more intuitive. If instead of 3 doors, say you have 100 doors, and you have 99 goats and 1 car. As the contestant, you choose a door. Say you choose door number 12. Monty, who again, remember, he knows where the car is. He goes through, it takes him a few minutes, but he opens 98 doors and shows you 98 goats. The 2 doors that he has left unopened are the door you chose, number 12, and door 67, over there. Now, what would you do in this situation? Would you stick with your original choice of door number 12? Or would you switch and go to the 1 door out of those other 99 that he didn't open? I think when you put it that way, it's reasonably obvious that the best choice is to switch doors. But it is the same situation when you have just 3 doors. Yes?
So I picked door number 2.
Yes.
You've opened door number 1, showing me there's a goat.
Yep.
I actually want the goat.
Okay.
Do I switch, or do I just say I'll have door number 1?
Well, you can switch to door number 1. He didn't say, do you want to switch to door 2 or 3? You can just switch doors.
Never mentioned that.
You may have to go. Go to G. Any other questions? Yes.
Anecdotally, everyone I've ever asked says the hardest bit of the BCE maths curriculum is probability.
Yes.
Are we screwed?
Are we screwed?
Can we teach people, not to make mistakes where probability and statistics are concerned?
I think one of the problems with, and our high school teacher friend may be able to help me in this, one of the problems with teaching probability is that there are so many numbers involved. And numbers really, really scare people, I think. That's why when I was putting this together, what I wanted to do was have no numbers in it, because they tend to freak people out. And so, probability is not that conceptually difficult, I don't think. I think there's just I think there's just a resistance to learning it sometimes, because that the problem with people not feeling comfortable around numbers. Is that your experience with teaching probability?
The numbers, what I find the problem with teaching probability is more just how counterintuitive it is, exactly like the Monty Hall problem.
Yeah.
Is that probability is one of those things that our brains simply aren't hardwired to understand. The gambler's fallacy. Whenever I teach probability, I always start with the gambler's fallacy. The idea that, if you're playing roulette and you lose 10 times in a row, well then you must win on the 11th time, your time is due. So I think that if you can sort of get your head around that type of stuff, forget about the intuition, ignore all of that. If you can actually just get it down to the numbers,
Yeah.
I find, sort of opposite to what you're saying, but I find if you can break it down just to the numbers and take out the counterintuitive nature, then it flows.
So is it then that process of translating the problem into a numerical problem? Does that become the area where it's more difficult?
It can. Often the problem can be as well if it's something that's counterintuitive, that's just hitting you right from the start. So we sort of find that a good way is just to go with a slow building up. Like if I ask you a simple question, 30% chance of rain today, what is the chances of it not raining? You can ask up to a primary school kid and they'll say, 70% chance. If you can sort of build everything up just from that point and break things down to small, like you're saying, small numbers, simple numbers, things like that, then you can start to make that type of thing more intuitive.
Yeah.
I think, and you can sort of tie that in together quite nicely.
Yeah. It takes a certain amount of conceptual thinking when you're talking about probability, because, for example, the 30% chance of rain means that if we had 100 days like today, it would rain in 30 of them and not rain in 70 of them. So it's very conceptual. In the end of the day, it will either have rain or it won't. And so I think it can be difficult to translate that into that kind of wider type of thinking. But I think it's, in general, I mean, the idea of probability being you've got a whole number of possible outcomes, which is your event space, it's called. These are all of the possible things that could happen. And you're restricting it down to the few things that you're interested in happening. I mean, then it's a simple ratio. It's just one divided by the other. And so if you think about it that way, I guess it's easy. But I guess the counterintuitive nature of it, as you say, can make it really good. I guess we've probably got about a minute left. And that's it.
Fantastic.